Hey there. Are you ready to unlock a world of brand new scary stories tonight? Before we dive into it, I want to know, where and when are you watching this? Drop your answers in the comments below and join our community. Make sure to subscribe and smash that like button so you never miss a spine-tingling moment. No, I never truly believed in hauntings, I began, studying the end of my cigar. But I've always felt uneasy about them. Ever experienced one? Someone asked from across the room. I hesitated, took a slow sip of my drink, and gave a faint nod. I've had encounters, strange ones. One in particular still makes me uneasy. Everyone leaned in a little, so I continued. You remember George Carson? Tall, light-haired, played for the varsity? I knew him well before he got married, around the time he got engaged to Miss Stoner, now his wife. He invited me to stay at a countryside house his family had rented. I couldn't go for Christmas, but I joined them just after New Year's for a short break. The house was called Woodcote, an old, charming place with twisting halls, strange angles, and the kind of layout that seemed more like a maze than a home. The group was small: George, his parents, two younger sisters, Miss Stoner, and myself. Everyone was cheerful, except Miss Stoner. She seemed withdrawn, often looking behind her or staring into nothing. George noticed it too, though he tried not to show it. I assumed it was just pre-wedding nerves, until something unsettling happened. One evening, after we played some games, George and I went upstairs to his study to relax. I had left my pipe in the billiard room, and rather than ask for another, I took a candle and went to retrieve it. The house was quiet, and when I returned, I stumbled on the staircase and dropped the candle. I reached out for the railing, and instead grabbed something cold and bony. A hand, one that slipped away before I could even react. I was alone, or so I thought. I didn't tell George. I figured I imagined it, but the memory stayed with me the next day as I practiced billiards. Miss Stoner came in, looking tense. She asked me, "Do you believe in things?" I played it off. Then she told me she'd seen a face in her room, behind a divider. It vanished whenever she moved. She thought she was imagining it, but she felt watched. I tried to calm her, said it was likely stress, but I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Later that day, George's mother came to me. She looked exhausted, said she hadn't slept well in weeks, hearing odd sounds and feeling like someone was there. I gave her something to help her sleep, same as I'd given Miss Stoner, but I knew now this wasn't just stress. I decided to stay behind the next morning while the others went to church and look into it myself. That night, no one seemed eager to go to bed. We all lingered. When I finally went upstairs, I sat in silence. Then came the noise again. Soft steps, a low groan. George heard it too. I saw him open his door across the hall. He invited me to his study. We kept our voices low. He told me he'd seen a face once too, peeking through the curtains. Just as he said it, he pointed behind me. The curtains moved. I rushed over. Nothing. But he looked shaken. We decided we had to search the house top to bottom the next day. Suddenly, a scream pierced the silence. Miss Stoner. We ran to her room. She was on the floor, pale and breathing hard, whispering about the face. We helped her back to bed. Once she was calm, I told George we had to go up to the attic. He agreed. With the butler and a lantern, we climbed to the top floor, and in a dusty corner we found a ladder leading to a closed hatch. I climbed it. The moment I opened it, something lunged at me. Something dirty, wild-eyed, and silent. We tumbled, and George struck it with the poker. It collapsed, stunned. We had found our ghost, but it wasn't anything paranormal. It was the property's original owner, supposedly away for treatment. He had escaped from a care facility and returned to his home, hiding in the attic for weeks. At night, he would sneak out quietly to find food, unnoticed by the others. No one knew how long he'd been living up there. Thankfully, no one was harmed. But the feeling that he had been watching all of us, all that time, still lingers with me. I used to work the passenger lift at the Empire Hotel, a big building made of red and white bricks. It looked like it had bacon stripes, and it stood right at the corner of the main street. After I left the Army with a good record, my old colonel helped me get this job. He was part of the hotel's management and said I'd be a perfect fit to run the lift. People trust soldiers, he told me. The job wasn't bad at all. The pay was good, and I liked talking to people as they came and went. The lift was a smooth-running hydraulic type, not one of those shaky ones. It was like a tiny living room with red velvet seats and big mirrors. Guests would admire themselves as I took them up or down. It felt more like floating than riding. Most guests used the lift at some point. Some were French and called it an ascenseur, and the Americans insisted on calling it an elevator, even though they spoke English just fine. My shift started at noon and ended at midnight. Mornings were quiet, but things got busy after lunch and especially in the evening. Between 6 and 8 p.m., when people were eating, it got quiet again, and I'd relax and read the paper. No smoking allowed, of course. I was good at remembering faces and floors. Guests only needed to tell me once which floor they stayed on. I had a sharp eye and a strong memory. One November, Colonel Saxby checked into the hotel. I noticed him right away. Tall, thin, stiff-legged from an old injury, and with a deep scar on his face. He stayed in room 210 on the 4th floor, just across from the lift. He always stood in the lift, never sat, even when it was empty. He spoke very little, but once asked which regiment I'd served in. He seemed deep in thought all the time. Then, in February, he suddenly stopped using the lift. At first, I thought he had gone out of town, but later, I overheard that he was very ill. A whole week passed, and still no sign of him. Every time I passed room 210, the door was closed, which was unusual for him. One Tuesday night, right at midnight, I was finishing my shift. Just as I reached for the light switch, the lift bell rang. The signal came from the 4th floor. I assumed it was a new guest who didn't know the lift closed after 12. I took the lift up, and to my surprise, Colonel Saxby was waiting at the door, dressed in his military cloak, hat on, ready to go outside. He looked pale and tired, but standing strong as ever. I didn't ask much, just greeted him and started the lift. He didn't speak. He stood silently under the lift lamp with his eyes hidden by the shadow of his hat. His face was pale, the scar even lighter. I told him it was nice to see him up and about, but he didn't reply. When the lift reached the ground floor, he walked out silently. I let the porter know, and he opened the door for the colonel. "That was strange," the porter said. "It was," I replied. "He looked unwell. What's he doing out this late in the cold?" "Maybe a costume party," joked the porter. But we were both uneasy. Then, the front doorbell rang again. 2 men entered. I recognized them as doctors. "We need to go to the 4th floor, urgent." one of them said. I explained the lift wasn't supposed to run after midnight, but they insisted it was serious, so I took them up. They went straight to room 210. As they entered, a nurse met them. "No change, I hope?" asked one doctor. "He passed just 5 minutes ago," the nurse said softly. I couldn't help it. "That can't be right," I said. "I just brought him down in the lift. He left through the front door." "You're mistaken," one doctor said. "It wasn't him. With respect, sir, I know who I saw. The night porter saw him too. He was wrapped in his military cloak." "Come see for yourself," the nurse offered. I followed them in, and there he was. Colonel Saxby, still in bed, still wearing that same cloak, but very much still. I sat with the porter all night, half expecting the colonel to ring the doorbell again. Every bell from then on gave me a chill. The next night, they brought his coffin in quietly. We carried it up in the lift. It barely fit. When we reached room 210, they took it inside. I waited outside, feeling cold all over. Then they brought the coffin back out and placed it right in front of the lift. The manager looked at me. "Take it down," he said. "I can't," I replied. "I already took him down once. That's enough for me." Without another word, they pushed the coffin in and the manager went with it. Just before closing the door, he turned and said, "Mole, I think this was your last ride." He was right. I left the Empire Hotel the next day and never looked back. When I got back to New York, there was a letter waiting for me from John Schuyler, my oldest friend. It simply said, "Come at once." That was enough for me. I didn't even change out of my travel clothes. I took a cab straight to his house, wondering what kind of emergency could make a man like John send such a desperate note. John and I go way back, to our school days. We'd stayed close, not just because of friendship, but because we understood each other's minds. He was full of passion while I was all logic, and yet we balanced each other. So when he asked for help, I didn't hesitate. As we met, I was shocked by how worn out he looked. His clothes were messy, his face drawn. "She's been terrible," he said, meaning his wife. "I haven't called anyone else. I didn't know what to do. The nurse is exhausted, too. Please, stay the night." I agreed, and we went upstairs together. On the way, his children rushed up and hugged him. "When will Mom get better?" they asked. He just kissed them and sent them back to the nursery. When we reached the 3rd floor, he hesitated at a locked door. "I saw in the papers she's back in town," he said. "Is that true?" I told him I'd seen her myself just hours ago. He didn't say more. I followed him into the room. It was a heavy, silent place. Thick carpets, padded walls. The windows were sealed. On the bed lay his wife, her face pale and tired, her arms covered in spots, her eyes wild and empty. Even in her condition, she carried a strange kind of elegance. She asked for water, then stared at me with disgust. "I hate you," she said, "but you give better relief than they do." She wasn't well, physically or mentally. I could see what had brought her to this place, and I could see how it had wrecked John. The worst part? There was no cure for her. Nothing had worked, not really. That night, I sent John and the nurse to get some rest. I stayed behind to watch her alone. The house was so still it felt like we were floating in space. I sat and watched her breathe, deep in thought. My mind went to John, brilliant, respected, now trapped in this nightmare. And then to his children. What would become of them? And what about the woman John truly loved but could never be with, all because of this marriage? The questions grew louder in my mind. What if? What if I did nothing? No medicine, no treatment, just silence. She was very weak. Without help, she wouldn't make it till morning. That would be the end of her suffering, and the beginning of healing for 4 others. Was that wrong? Or was it mercy? She woke up, demanding the medicine. I said no. Her shock turned into rage. She screamed, begged, threatened, even tried to attack me. But I held firm. She tore up the room in desperation. She fell, exhausted, on the floor. When she found a glass and tried to harm herself with it, I stopped her just in time. She looked up at me, whispering, "Please." Just once. I didn't answer. I picked her up, cleaned her up, and laid her back in bed. Then I sat down again. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. I knew what I was doing. I wasn't helping her. I was letting time do the work. Her breaths grew slower. I watched the clock, and then it hit me. The silence. The old rocking chair in the corner. It reminded me of my mother. She was always speaking of what was right and wrong. Her voice came back to me, and with it, something I hadn't felt in years. Guilt. I started pacing the room. The silence was loud now. I thought of the children again, of John, of that other woman, and of myself. Would I carry this forever? Could I forget this night? Just then, she cried out, a sound that cut through everything. I froze. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever heard. My hands were cold, my breath shallow. I wanted it to end. I wanted the sun to rise, but I couldn't move. Not yet. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that this wasn't wrong. It was necessary. It was better for everyone. But still, I hesitated. I reached for the syringe, then stopped. My hand shook, my mind screamed, and then I dropped it, crushed it under my heel. I couldn't do it. Not even for the greater good, not even to save 4 people. I sat back down and waited, not for her to pass, but for the morning to come. And it did. But I knew I'd never be the same again. When I started my sophomore year of college, I had to take a mandatory statistics course that felt like it was taught in a different language. After failing the first midterm, I reluctantly signed up for the university's free peer tutoring program. That's how I met Dean. At first, he was a lifesaver. He was a senior, incredibly patient, and had a knack for explaining complex formulas in a way that actually made sense. We met twice a week in a small study room in the campus library. For the first month, everything was perfectly normal. The shift was subtle. It started with him texting me outside our session times. Initially, it was about homework, but then it morphed into more personal questions. Did you finish the problem set? What are you doing tonight? I figured he was just being friendly, so I'd reply politely. Then he started mentioning things that I hadn't told him. One Monday, he said, "Saw you at the football game Saturday. That red scarf looked good on you." I had gone with a group of friends and sat in the crowded student section. I never saw him. I brushed it off as a coincidence, but a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. A week later, I arrived at our study room to find a cup of my favorite, very specific coffee order from the campus cafe waiting for me on the table. "Figured you could use a pick-me-up," he said with a smile. I hadn't told him what I drank. He must have seen me order it sometime. That's what I told myself. but the coincidences were starting to feel less like coincidences. He started bumping into me all over campus, in the dining hall, outside my biology lecture, once even near my dorm building late at night. Each time, he'd have a casual excuse, but his eyes lingered a little too long. The final straw was when I decided to skip a tutoring session to go to a movie with my roommate. I sent him a text an hour beforehand, a simple, "Hey, can't make it tonight, something came up." His response was instant. "Why? Where are you going?" I didn't reply. 15 minutes later, another text. "You're with that guy from your English class, aren't you?" I had no idea who he was talking about. I blocked his number. I decided I would just drop the tutoring and take my chances with the final exam. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. About a week later, I was in my dorm room alone. My roommate was spending the night at her boyfriend's place. It was almost midnight, and the building was quiet except for the hum of my laptop. Suddenly, I heard a sound from the hallway that made my blood run cold. It was the distinct beep and click of a key card being inserted into the lock on my door, followed by the electronic buzz of it being rejected. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. My roommate must have forgotten something, but the lock buzzed again, a failed attempt. And then a third. I held my breath, listening. I could hear a faint, frustrated sigh from the other side of the door. It was a man's sigh. My heart hammered against my ribs. I silently crept off my bed and slid my heavy wooden desk chair under the doorknob, wedging it in place. I stood there in the dark, my back pressed against the wall, for what felt like an eternity. After a few minutes of absolute silence, my phone, which was on my nightstand, lit up with a notification. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I picked it up. The message read, "I saw your light on. I have your stats notes you left in the library. I was just trying to give them back. No need to be scared." I looked over at my desk. My stats notebook was sitting right where I'd left it. He had never been in the library with me. He was lying. He had been trying to get into my room. I never found out how he got a key card or how he knew which room was mine. I called campus security immediately. They reviewed the hallway cameras and confirmed it was him. A restraining order was put in place, and he was expelled. But even now, years later, I can't sleep in a room without a deadbolt, and the sound of a keycard lock still makes me feel a primal, chilling wave of fear. This story takes place back in 2001, during my college years. I went to school in a big city, and I had a close group of 9 friends. We were inseparable, studying, riding motorcycles, hanging out daily. Those were some of the best years of my life. We laughed a lot, pulled all-nighters, and lived in the moment. Among us was my first love, so everything felt even more memorable. One weekend in our junior year, we planned a guys-only retreat. It was supposed to be a relaxing breakout in the countryside. One of our buddies had a family farm about 2 hours away. His dad owned over 200 acres of land, fields, woods, and chicken coops. There was a large farmhouse with a pool, and we were all excited. We packed our backpacks, loaded up on snacks, and rode out together. All 9 of us were on motorcycles, cruising into open country roads. That first night, we lit a campfire, grilled food, told stories, and relaxed. The second day was more of the same: music, laughter, and good food. It felt like the perfect weekend until everything changed. Around 11 p.m. on Saturday, my friend's dad called the farmhouse. He'd just received word that a relative had passed away in a nearby town. It was another 2 hours deeper into the countryside, more rural than the farm. His dad asked if we could ride there to check on the widow. She was alone. Without hesitation, we agreed. It felt like the right thing to do. We suited up, got back on our bikes, and hit the road around 11:30 p.m. The roads were quiet, barely any lights, just the sound of our engines. A few stretches were paved, but most were winding dirt roads. We'd been riding for almost 2 hours with no one in sight. No signs, no buildings, just trees and dark sky above us. Without smartphones or GPS, we were using a printed map. We pulled over trying to figure out the directions. It was now close to 2 a.m., and the air felt still, almost too still. Finally, in the distance, we saw a pair of headlights approaching. We flagged the car down and explained we were lost. The driver said he was from the same town and offered to guide us. As we prepared to follow him, he gave us an odd warning. "If any of you smoke, light a cigarette when we hit the dirt road," he said. I asked him why. His answer chilled me. "So the witches don't snatch you." We all kind of laughed it off, assuming he was joking. But something about the way he said it didn't sit right. We shrugged it off and followed him into the forested path. The road narrowed, with the woods on both sides dark and bare. Strangely, even in summer, the trees had no leaves, just dry branches. As soon as we entered the woods, the man rolled down his window. He lit a cigarette and drove on in silence. The rest of us followed. The deeper we went, the heavier the atmosphere felt. It wasn't just dark, it was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No insects, no night animals, just the rumble of our bikes. That's when I started feeling a strange tension in my chest. I rode up beside a friend who smoked and asked him to light one. He laughed, but didn't, so I stopped, lit one myself, and kept going. My helmet was off, smoke curling from a cigarette in my hand. Then it happened. A laugh. Not a normal laugh. Something chilling. It echoed through the woods, high-pitched and drawn out. I looked at the friends riding closest to me and asked if they heard it too. They nodded, faces pale, no words spoken. That laugh didn't come just once. We heard it again and again. It sounded like it came from high above us in the trees, 5 times. That same eerie cackle. We didn't know what to think. Eventually, after what felt like forever, but was only 15 minutes, we saw the faint outline of a small house up ahead. We parked quietly, still shaken, and thanked the man in the car. He gave us a nod and drove off into the night, no questions asked. The house was dimly lit, but the widow answered the door right away. She was clearly grieving and overwhelmed, and we stayed to help. We didn't speak about what happened in the woods, not yet. We stayed through the next day, cleaning, fixing things, and supporting her. By late afternoon, we said our goodbyes and rode back to the farm. This time, we took a different route. No one wanted to go through the woods. There was an unspoken agreement among us not to bring it up. But once we got back to the city, that silence broke. Each of us remembered the laugh exactly the same way. 9 people, 9 separate bikes, 1 shared experience. Whatever that was, it wasn't a trick of the mind. We all heard it, and we all remember it. A few days later, I asked my friend's dad about the woods. He paused and then told me an old story from local folklore. They say a witch haunts those woods, drawn to lone travelers at night. She doesn't like fire, which is why locals smoke when passing through. He admitted he always thought it was just a rural myth. We never told him what we'd heard. It didn't feel necessary. But deep down, we knew the truth. That the man in the car was right. And that some stories exist for a reason.